This program is brought to you by Emory University.
On April 30th, 2015, the Center for Faculty Development and Excellence at Emory University presented an introduction to the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, which addressed the basic components of conducting teaching and learning workshops, formulating research project questions and assessment strategies, and disseminating project findings. The speakers were Donna Troca, Associate Director of the Center for Faculty Development and Excellence and Adjunct Assistant Professor in the Institute of the Liberal Arts, and Anya Kowalik, a doctoral candidate in the Laney Graduate School and the CFDE Dean's Teaching Fellow. This video includes highlights from the workshop.
The tricky thing about SOTL, or the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, is that depending on where you are at, where you're teaching, whether you're lecturer, tenure track, or non-tenure track, is kind of where it's going to count in tenure or promotion. And what we've learned this year and years before is that things work differently in the different schools. Okay, so I'm not entirely sure what it will count for in your school because the schools are different. But my gut says is that for most people on the tenure track, if you do Scholarship of Teaching and Learning research, if you write, publish in it, it's going to count towards your teaching. Okay. If you're in the lecture track, and I think if you're at Oxford, I would argue that it's going to count towards your research. Okay, it's research on teaching, but it will count towards your research. There's a kind of a false binary, but it's there, between what's called scholarly teaching and SOTL, okay? And scholarly teaching, and it's a contested term for sure, scholarly teaching, chances are most of you are already doing it, okay? So you're being thoughtful about your teaching, you're thinking about the impact of your teaching, you have course objectives on your syllabus, you're trying to measure whether or not your students, what kind of learning they're doing, if they're learning at all. And oftentimes you're experimenting or innovating in your classroom. So a lot of what we do is really based on kind of hunches. Maybe it's what worked for us as when we were learners. So that would be understood as kind of scholarly teaching. Okay.
Well, so one way of thinking about what SOTL is to say it's scholarly teaching taken to the next level, right? So the broadest definition would be it's a systematic inquiry into teaching and learning made public, right? And that notion of disseminating your scholarship, your research, your inquiry into teaching and learning is a crucial aspect of SOTL, right? In literature, you will frequently find this term, the teaching commons, right? So the idea is that teaching, what we do in the classroom, it's not this sort of solitary activity that we all struggle with independently and alone, but it's actually something shared, something that we put out there, something that we sort of learn from each other, right? And also it's a scholarship of teaching and learning, right? So one thing to sort of keep in mind as you design your project is you link your teaching practice, innovation, activities you design to student learning, right? So you test the outcomes of teaching on your students, right? That's why it's systematic. You pose a hypothesis, you pose a question, and then you design, study that sort of leads you to some kind of outcomes, results. Assessment of your SOTL project is a crucial aspect of SOTL. It's connected to other research in education, and it is made public, right? We're going to talk about different possibilities of making your SOTL scholarship, your SOTL research public. It's oftentimes the emphasis on publishing in peer-reviewed journals, but this isn't the only way of sharing SOTL. Data and assessment for SOTL projects. There are different aspects that you can measure. You can try and assess student perceptions or student attitudes. You can assess content knowledge. You can assess skills. You could assess transfer of skills. You could assess, what else? Retention of knowledge, right? The important thing to keep in mind about assessment for SOTL is that it differs from institutional assessment in that it is designed and implemented by teachers, by you, right? So it's not something, sort of some tools, measures imposed on you from the outside. It's your research question, your project drives the kind of assessment tool that you will develop. And then we'll have some case studies, so you'll see how that works in practice, right? But this is, I guess, what's great about SODL, right? That you sort of determine how to measure the outcomes of the project. Assessment in SODL is formative, meaning it provides an impetus for improvement, further research, and classroom experimentation. And I shared this quote with you here, that SODL is rooted in an impulse not to prove, but to improve, right? And this sort of notion of improvement is important. And this is, just to give you a sense, this is by no means an exhaustive list of what could count, what kind of tools you could use for assessing your projects. You could use classroom-based evidence, something like student exams, projects, papers, concept tests, grades, online discussions, and then you perform content analysis, student-generated assessment, evaluation surveys, 1-minute papers, Nadia's point activities, critical incident questionnaires. Do you know what those are? It's a questionnaire in which you ask the following questions, and these are just a few. At what moment in the class did you feel most engaged, right? What action that a teacher took in class this week did you find most helpful? Nadia's point would be, what was the most difficult part, or what was the most difficult concept discussed in class so far, right? So a lot of these actually are in-class feedback activities. The SALG is, let me just look at student assessment of their learning gains. It's a website that can help you design an assessment tool. And then again, depending what your project is, you could also draw teacher-generated assessments such as course portfolios, self-reflection logs, etc.
So again, this can count as both research and teaching, and the ways that it helps us with teaching is not only it improves our teaching and our student learning, but it also helps us innovate and then grounds us in research. So I'll talk about IRB and you talk about the ethics? Okay, so yes, if you're going to be doing this, because this is research, you would have to get IRB approval. So what I'm going to tell you is that I don't, Anne was asking me kind of very, very specifics, and I don't know the specifics, but I can find out the specifics and send them to you around the materials. I can tell you from my own, this is not my teaching research, but my scholarship research. I did oral histories, and I did, it was at a time where oral history was kind of on the fence whether or not it needed IRB. This was, you know, many years ago, and I ended up just doing the IRB because I didn't want to do my research and not be able to, you know, so I erred on the side of safety, but what I was able to do was kind of like an expedited, I don't know, has anyone done IRBs? I mean, yeah, right, so it's a problem. I mean, I'm glad it exists because I don't want people to be taken advantage of, but, you know, a lot of people don't love it. You should tell your students that you have this project, right? This is what's happening, and there is some sort of research going on. Now, do your students feel comfortable enough to say we don't want to participate? Right? What happens then? Can they not participate? What happens to your project in that case? Another issue, you know, let's say you have two control groups, and one group would be involved, would be taught along according to the lecture model, and then you are doing something more active, collaborative with the other group. And then if your hypothesis is that lecture-based teaching is less effective, you know, like, is it ethical to basically have these students for one semester taught in a way where you know sort of, or hypothesize is working less, right? So that's another question. We sort of with Shwana and Anne, so this question sort of we emerged. One way of thinking about the role of your students in SODL projects is, you know, not only as guinea pigs that you're experimenting on, but there is you can ask them to actively reflect, right, on their own learning through journals, learning logs, right. So then they are sort of more. I mean, it's still data, it's still an assessment tool for you, but you know, they can also sort of be a bit more active participants in the process, right. So that's just like one way. But you know, you will find these, the more you read in SODL, you will find that these questions emerge, right? And this is also something to think about as you design your projects. So, something to think about, and this is again kind of I don't want to say a debate, maybe a debate, that seems like a good word, kind of a debate in among faculty developers and among people who do SODL work is kind of, what do you do with this work, okay? people have been doing SOTL work for a long time, and really kind of the gold standard now is to have your research published in a peer-reviewed journal, right? And I'm going to show you a list in a second of the places Anya's going to talk about that you can do it. That is one way that you can share your work, okay? Another way to share your work is like what we're doing right now. Right, like you can just share your work. I've done, presentations on different things that I've done in my classroom. So that's a kind of a low stakes way that you can share your work. And then another place is if you do something kind of at your home institution, then you can go to these places, right, and do a presentation at conferences. So these are some places that if you're doing SOTL work and you want to kind of test it out with the audience, you might consider going to. And again, we're going to share this with you. So some of these are kind of more local. The Lilly conferences, they have conferences all over the country. DC, Michigan, a bunch of different places. SOTL Commons that's probably the closest one. I went to that a couple weeks ago. It's at Georgia Southern. And then POD is that's the faculty developers. That's where faculty developers go. So that's another thing to think about. The next level, so if you could kind of talk among your department or your school, you could come do an event like this. You could go and present at a conference. Another possibility is there's these kind of newsletters. So James Rem does one. It's called the Forum on Teaching and Learning. So again, that's not necessarily a peer-reviewed article, but it's in circulation. Okay, so that's another thing. Yeah. Okay.
We started some places to publish. We started with peer review solo article. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. Teaching and Learning Inquiry, International Journal for the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, Journal of the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, Journal of Technology, Science Education, National Teaching and Learning Forum. This is not, that's peer review, right?
Yeah, that's the James Rem.
Okay. Now the thing is that then each discipline has its own educational journal, so the list is much, much longer. And one thing I'm going to pitch here also is by the time I finish at CFDE, we're going to have a library guide to SOTL with all these books, articles, places to publish. So like you will have all of that in one place. I'm kind of still working on that. The SOTL Advocate blog and the iSOTL blog, they are based at different universities. So the SOTL Advocate is Illinois State, and then the iSOTL blog is Montreal in Canada. And I looked at them. It looks like they publish posts for faculty sort of at those universities, but you might ask if they are open for a guest post, for instance, right? So blogging would be yet another idea for disseminating your research. And then then I mentioned the academic learning community that you folks might participate next year. I mean, there is no reason why you wouldn't want to collaborate or sort of set up maybe a SOTL blog at Emory. I mean, this is just sort of that. I think that's just easy, right? But peer review, but then there are other venues as well, right? To sort of get it out there and engage in conversations.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Emory University.